My research usually is based on using a twin design in order to understand how genes and certain environmental risk factors are important for diseases in the elderly. When we look at questions concerning dementia, one of the issues is whether or not there are risk factors early in life that are important late in life, or in midlife and late in life. One example then would be looking at overweight and obesity and whether or not that is important for development of dementia late in life. And what we see is indeed there is an elevated risk if one is overweight in midlife for developing dementia late in life.
Researchers often use twins in studies because they're like a natural experiment. Fraternal twins share half their DNA and identical twins share all of it. So if something's happening to one twin and not the other, researchers can tell whether it's due to genetics or exposure to environmental factors like eating too many calories.
Indeed, there are a number of risk factors in midlife that we see are important for dementia development late in life, including obesity. Another example is midlife diabetes. Another example is physical activity.
Considering midlife is one of the busiest times in our lives with career and family, it's also one of the easiest times to let our health and our waistlines slip by the wayside. So just how might being overweight or obese in midlife increase your chances of dementia when you're older?
Obesity in itself is going to be influencing our atherosclerosis, going to be influencing our propensity to having higher blood pressure and whatnot, and all of these things are very important for brain health. So that we're really, to some extent, talking about healthy heart, healthy mind as well.
So what sort of risk are we talking about, and how much weight do you need to lose?
If you're overweight in midlife, your risk is increased by 120%. What we don't know is exactly how much and what kind of weight reduction in midlife would be necessary to help us be preventing more dementia.
If you have a strong family history, does the weight in middle life still have an effect?
It may very well have an effect, because what we could be talking about is being able to postpone the onset of the disease if one had a more normal weight. I certainly should be considering doing what I can to be, if not preventing, at least delaying the onset of the disease.
So does that mean that dementia and obesity have the same genetic cause?
I think that our results indicate that there are probably a number of genes that are in common to obesity and overweight and dementia. We're not sure exactly which ones, and it certainly doesn't mean that any gene that we identify that's important for overweight is necessarily important for dementia. But we have some indications that there might be some, and right now we're working on looking at whether or not, for example, the FTO gene, which is a known risk factor gene for obesity, is important in explaining the association between obesity and dementia.
So should we give up if there's nothing we can do about it?
I don't think we need to give up. The point of the matter is that these are only risk factors that are giving us a certain susceptibility, and quite to the contrary, we see that there are ways, by modifying both our propensity to become obese, to be physically active and whatnot, that will help us. If nothing else, it'll help us delay the onset of any cognitive decline. If we think about the known susceptibility gene for dementia, the ApoE gene, only 40% of the cases of Alzheimer's disease are carriers of this particular allele. That means that there's a great deal of other, both preventative as well as risk factor in our environment as well as in our genes that can be helping us in preventing the disease. Certainly looking at a family history is one of the best questions one can ask about whether or not one's at a greater risk. And I think that the other thing that we can look at is whether or not we live a healthy lifestyle.
Where does this finding sit with what we already know about preventing cognitive decline?
If we put it in perspective with the other various risk factors and protective factors that we know of, there are some indications that social support, social activity and whatnot is also protective. that being mentally stimulated is also protective. Responding to crossword puzzles, filling out crossword puzzles, things like that. I think obesity is almost higher on the list because it's something that we see is a risk factor already in midlife. Whereas most of the work that we're doing with social support, with mental stimulation, etc., those are more things later in life that may be much more temporary in their effects or much more specific in their effects. Crossword puzzles, for example, are very good at training you for crossword puzzles, but there's no real evidence that they're good for preventing cognitive decline.
So why is this middle life issue so important?
Well, let's face it, this is something we know that we can do something about. And it's important for us to realize that we can't just be waiting until we're in our 50s and 60s to be concerned about our cognitive health later in life. We can be doing things already in our 30s and 40s.